Welcome to The Explainer. Look, we all know the movies, right? The tailored tuxedos, the Aston Martins, that iconic theme music. But today, we're bypassing Hollywood entirely and going straight back to the source material. We're going to deconstruct Ian Fleming's original literary James Bond. We'll be exploring the highly specific, deeply flawed, and honestly fascinatingly enduring character found directly in the text, along with the massive literary universe that exploded after him.
So let's jump right in. And we have to start with the sheer hilarious irony of how this all began. A character deliberately designed to be the most boring man in the world inadvertently became a massive global icon. When Ian Fleming sat down to write back in 1952, he absolutely did not want a flashy, suave hero. He literally said he wanted a blunt instrument. He wanted a totally neutral figure just being wielded by a government department. And to top it off, he actively sought out the dullest name he could possibly find.
And wow, did he achieve that neutrality in the most mundane way imaginable. He essentially stole the name from a mild-mannered bird expert. Fleming was a really keen birdwatcher, and he just happened to have Dr. James Bond's field guide to The Birds of the West Indies sitting right there on his desk. He lifted the name because it was unromantic, Anglo-Saxon, and just perfectly neutral. He actually told the real James Bond's wife later on that it was the briefest, plainest-sounding name he could think of.
Okay, so beyond that incredibly dull name and the Hollywood gloss we're so used to, who exactly is the highly specific man written in those original texts? Like, how does the actual literary James Bond look and operate day to day?
Well, if you read the books, Fleming's Bond is way grittier. He's defined by some incredibly specific physical traits. The text describes him as having dark, quote-unquote, cruel good looks, a thin, 3-inch vertical scar running down his right cheek, and this trademark coma of black hair constantly resting on his forehead. And get this, he wasn't some hulking bodybuilder either. He was a slim, 6 feet tall, 168 pounds, and he had a recurring, noted resemblance to the American singer Hoagy Carmichael.
Now, he wasn't entirely pulled out of thin air either. The literary Bond is really a composite character, drawn directly from the real-life commandos and spies that Fleming actually served with in the Naval Intelligence Division during World War II. You've got guys like Fleming's own brother Peter, who ran intense behind-the-lines operations. Then you have men like MI6 station head Bill Biffy Dunderdale, a guy who literally wore handmade suits and got chauffeured around Paris in a Rolls-Royce during the war. Bond was essentially a melting pot of all these real-world daring intelligence officers.
Okay, 60. Just let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure represents his daily intake of custom-made cigarettes. And honestly, sometimes the text says it was as high as 70. This really gives you a clear picture of the sheer, unapologetic excess that completely defined the literary character's lifestyle.
You see, Fleming was totally obsessed with specificity and brands, and he loaded the books with details about Bond's absurdly specific vices. Bond didn't just casually smoke. He smoked a very specific custom blend of Balkan and Turkish tobacco that had a higher nicotine content, explicitly made just for him by Moreland of Grosvenor Street. He carried exactly 50 of them at a time in a wide gunmetal case. And those 3 gold bands on the filter, they were specifically added to mirror his naval rank of commander, which, by the way, was a habit Fleming actually borrowed straight from his own life.
Here's another mind-blowing number for you. 46. That is the exact number of alcoholic drinks Bond throws back over the course of just one single novel on Her Majesty's Secret Service. We're talking champagne, bourbon, vodka martinis, and massive steins of German beer. And remarkably, the text notes that this immense intake literally never seems to affect his performance out in the field.
These wild consumption habits really define who the literary character is. A man who demands extravagant tastes, super precise cocktail measurements, and yeah, even occasional narcotics to function. Take the famous Vesper Martini. It's not just a cool catchphrase, it's a very precise recipe he actually invents in Casino Royale. It's 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, and half a measure of Kina Lillet. On missions, he eats incredibly rich exotic foods as a sort of antidote to Britain's post-war austerity, though ironically at home he just prefers simple scrambled eggs. Also, he completely despises tea, he calls it mud, and literally blames it for the downfall of the British Empire. And when he needs extreme endurance, he occasionally pops amphetamines, like Benzedrine, and washes them down to champagne. Wild, right?
Section 1. The Fleming Years, the Maker and the Original Run.
Pounding out 2,000 words every single morning during his annual holidays at his GoldenEye estate in Jamaica, Fleming unleashed a rapid succession of literature. This resulted in 14 total books before his passing. The timeline here is just fascinating. He started drafting Casino Royale in February of 1952 for one specific reason: to distract himself from his upcoming wedding to his pregnant girlfriend. I mean, you can't make this up. The book was a runaway success, and he just pumped these novels out yearly until his death in 1964, with the final 2 books being published posthumously.
Section 2. The Continuation Era, Achieving Literary Immortality.
So, the really crucial point here is that James Bond absolutely did not die with his creator. Instead, the literary mantle is passed on to a massive roster of authorized continuation authors. When you look at the sheer volume of non-Fleming literature, it's actually staggering. It kicked off with Kingsley Amis back in 1968, but just consider the massive, multi-decade contributions from guys like John Gardner and Raymond Benson. Gardner alone wrote 16 books over a 15-year stretch. He effectively dragged Bond into the 1980s and kept the character alive and kicking for a whole new generation of readers.
And what's cool is that these authors brought totally different flavors to the character. Gardner modernized a slightly older Bond. He gave him some gray at the temples and definitely incorporated an increase in Americanisms into the dialogue. But then Raymond Benson took over the reins in the late 90s, and he aggressively stripped away the quirky gadgets to return to Fleming's ruthless blazing guns roots. Benson handed him back the classic Walther PPK and made the character noticeably cruder and more aggressive, which actually closely mirrored Ian Fleming's original brutal intent.
Moving into the modern era, high-profile authors have just continuously reinvented the timeline. Sometimes they drop Bond into a contemporary, post-9/11 world, which is exactly what Jeffrey Deaver did with his novel Carte Blanche. Other times, authors like William Boyd and Anthony Horowitz anchor him firmly back in his 1950s and 60s prime. Horowitz even utilized previously unpublished Fleming manuscripts to craft these incredibly authentic prequels. And recently, Charlie Higson wrote a novel specifically tied to the real-world coronation of King Charles III. It just really showcases the character's unbelievable versatility.
Section 3. Expanding the Bond Universe, Prequels, Spin-offs, and New Perspectives.
But here's the thing. To truly maintain that absolute pop culture dominance, the literary universe had to expand way beyond just 007's adult missions. And man, has it ever. This universe now encompasses his schoolboy origins in the Young Bond series, exploring his days at Eton in the 1930s. We've got Samantha Weinberg exploring the inner workings of MI6 through Miss Moneypenny's own diaries. There are even brand new spin-offs focusing entirely on his colleagues. We're talking Felix Leiter, the Q Branch, and even an expanding roster of other 00 agents out in the field. It's a massive ecosystem now.
All of this leaves us with one incredible final thought. Just how fascinating is it that a character deliberately designed to be a blunt, anonymous, totally boring instrument has achieved such undeniable literary immortality? I mean, going from a stressed-out groom typing away on a Jamaican vacation to an ever-expanding universe of superstar authors and endless spin-offs, the literary James Bond has proven to be entirely unkillable. So, what do you think? Will there ever actually be a final mission for 007, or is the literary James Bond just destined to outlive us all? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible stories behind our favorite icons.